Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie Cotherman. I'm coming to you from my basement. So if you hear the pitter patter of little feet above me, it's my four kids. Amy and I both graduated from PTS. She graduated with a master's degree, MA in 2011, and I graduated from PTS in 2012 with an MDiv. And we now have four kids. And thanks to COVID and everything, they've been home for like 11 months, which has been a blessing. And also sometimes trying. Um, and their ages are 9, 7, 4, and 1. So yeah, we're in the thick of this parenting young children thing too. But I'm really excited to be part of Alumni Days this year. I wish we were in person sometime. That will happen again, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I think the theme for this year, to abide in Christ, what a great theme, because that's really all we can do. At certain points of last year, you just have to press in, right? And I found myself having to do the same thing, just realizing that my only strength does come through him, through abiding in him, that he is the true vine, and everything we do is just the outflow of that. And sometimes, that's always true, but sometimes in good times we can kind of deceive ourselves. But in times like the last year or so, it's been brutally apparent that Christ is going to be our only source for ministry, especially when the whole church world is thrown upside down and you can't meet, or you're having discussions about how to meet safely, and people have vastly different views sometimes within the same church. What a year. But today I want to tell you a little bit about what God's called us to, and he was calling us to it during our time at PTS. We might not have fully understood what it was, but he was definitely preparing us for it then. As I look back, it's things like our church history courses, and I'm a historian, so obviously church history was big for me. And I sat through and enjoyed a lot of classes with Scott Sundquist in those days, and John Wilson, and it was just a great experience. And it was the history and the missiology classes that really started to form this kind of missiological mind, this idea of thinking about contextualization and thinking about what the church had done to address the needs of its culture and joining God's great mission, the Missio Dei. That was an idea that I had never heard before coming to seminary, taking a perspectives class at seminary, going through the missiology courses. And the idea that God has a mission in the world. The church doesn't, but God does. We can join him in his mission, the Missio Dei, the mission of God. And that idea has been so formational and foundational for all that we've done. And the other thing that I think has been really important for us was just the practical ministry stuff, the stuff with Craig Barnes or Edvin Van Driel, at lunch, and going through, when I was doing my ministry practicum, I was helping to lead a youth group. We had a student take his own life during that year, and just processing that over lunch helped me think pastorally, and really prepared us for a ministry that we didn't even know we were going to have, because we came into PTS thinking that I was going to be a worship pastor and a youth leader. I just want to be a Christian rock star. And then we left thinking I was going to be an academic, and I went to UVA and earned a PhD down there in church history, religious studies with a focus on church history. But in the midst of that, God knew that our calling to pastoral ministry had not been in vain, and still was going to bear fruit. And so about halfway through my work down at UVA, I started to feel God pulling our hearts back to pastoral ministry. I wasn't sure what to do with it, because I always thought it was an either or kind of thing, either academics or pastoral ministry. And I had put in all this work to get a PhD, and was in the midst of that process, and then felt this call to ministry. And what I came to discern, along with Amy, my wife, over about 2 years of praying, because we couldn't leave. I was still in the midst of a PhD program. We couldn't come back to do anything in ministry yet. So we just had to pray for 2 years. And I discerned what I felt like were three callings, that God had put three callings on my life. They were very important for who he wanted me to be. And the first was my family. I was going to never want to gain the whole church world and lose my family. That was something that was just at the crux of who I was, that I was married to Amy, and I had at that point 2 children. Now I have 4, and that's who God's called me to be: a dad, a husband. And the second and third of these callings, I talk about my 3 callings. The second and third, the second was to writing, to academics, to teaching. Those are something that God has pulled my heart toward. I've always loved to read, to study, and he's opened doors for me to get the kind of credentials that you need to do it. And I just felt like that was something that wasn't for naught either. But also the calling that I received when I was 17 in youth group to be a pastor, I'd never been able to kick that to the curb. And that was there too, to be a planter, I found out, and a pastor. And so those are the three callings that really drive my life: a calling to be a part of my family and faithful there, a calling to be faithful to an academic and scholarly journey with God, and a calling to pastor and even plant potentially, which is what we did in 2016. I thought I was going to have to choose between them, but God had other ideas, and he has so far allowed me to hold them in tension and in actually fruitful conversation, these three callings. Through it all, I've tried to follow where he was leading. When we were discerning where to plant a church, the first thing I sensed was Steeler country. It was like Pittsburgh, somewhere in there. I thought maybe a university town with this degree and working with university students, and God kind of pulled our hearts back to where we're from, to Oil City, Pennsylvania, a town of about 10,000. It's the largest town within about an hour in a very rural county. Venango County, 56,000 people. Clarion County is even smaller, where we actually grew up, in the town of Knox. We're both from Knox with a population of 1,200 and a county-wide population about 40,000. So those are the two counties that I would call home. And we planted a church in 2016. We moved back from Charlottesville, Virginia, a great place to live, back to where we were from, which is also a great place to live, but looked a lot different than Charlottesville. Rural poverty, post-industrial. Oil City is really a microcosm of a post-industrial city. When Quaker State and Pennzoil left in 1994, it just devastated the local economy. And so they've been rebuilding ever since. But God called us back here in 2016. And that call has been an avenue through which God brought more creativity and more just joy and growth into our lives than we could have ever expected. And so all of that was because we were trying, though not perfectly, to abide in him and to faithfully follow him. And I think, when I think about abiding in Christ, my two prayers for my life really point in that direction. And again, these are not things I've done perfectly, but they are the prayers for my life: to be faithful in all my callings, and to live with a humble confidence, humble knowing that it's not me, it's Christ in me, but confident knowing that as a child of the King, he will equip me to do what he's called me to. And to walk with that kind of faithfulness and humble confidence is what we've tried to do. And God's been so good to us in the midst of it. So as I see it, there are really two tracks, and I'm two tracks to like the way creativity has worked out in our ministry. The first is through Oil City Vineyard Church itself. As I said, we planted in 2016, my wife and I, in our living room on a house we had just closed on a couple of weeks before in Oil City, Pennsylvania. And we had 8 people, all people we knew before, in our living room. And within 6 weeks, we had found a public space that we were able to use each week for free, thanks to a local philanthropic organization in the National Transit Building, which is a building that John Rockefeller had actually owned a company out of, and it was this great space that fit comfortably about 65 people. And by the time we moved out, not quite a year later, we were running like 80-something people in the summer, and there was no air conditioning. It was quite an amazing time, and also it came with its share of things to work around. We'll put it that way. We moved to the local YWCA and met in its gym, and where we still meet. Although with COVID, we've had to be creative, right? Just like you have. So, we were online for a while only, and then this summer we found we could meet in the local park, and the city wouldn't rent it to us. But they said anyone could use it. So we would show up with a generator and we would provide our own electricity. And we met in the Justice Park in Oil City from the middle of June through the last weekend of October. And I will tell you, by the end, there were weeks where I was preaching when literally it was 34 degrees when I started my sermon. I could not feel the pages in my Bible, but it was amazing to see the people come out and the way that ministered to our town, where some folks just did not feel safe being inside, and we were able to provide an outdoor venue. But it's all kinds of ways that God's allowed us to be creative at OCV. And, things like events and outreaches. We started kind of very early on with a princess party, and in that season and that time, it was a great thing to do. And we ended up being able to connect with our town and the local business that we hosted it at. You know, one of my favorite things that we've done was free haircuts. I remember people saying, what free haircuts? Like they had not heard of that in our town. And even a state representative that lives in our town came by and was like, I've never heard of this. This is a great idea. And we cut 46 kids' hair with like 6 hairdressers in 2 hours and provided like hygiene bags and crafts for the kids. And it was just an amazing event for us, for the community, and then inspired the local United Way. The next year, they hosted an even bigger event, and we partnered with them. And last year, I think we partnered with them last summer, and they cut over 200 kids' hair. It was just an amazing thing, and it was cool to kind of help launch that. Another thing that we were part of that ended up becoming something bigger that was really fun to be a part of was a local picnic in the summer, you know, and that event actually started with us, and it grew to include all the churches, and we didn't own it anymore. It was the churches and the ministerium, so it was great. We've hosted art gallery Sundays where we don't do a regular Sunday service. We simply let people bring in art or let them perform. And it's been really cool. And other things we've done on Sundays are community roundtables where community leaders will bring them in. And instead of having a sermon that week, we'll listen to them, because community integration is something that's really important to us. We want to bridge that secular sacred divide, because we don't actually think that that's helpful. You know, God, it's all God's world. As Abraham Kuyper said, you know, Jesus looks at creation and says, mine, it's all his. And the gospel pertains to all of life. So integration is something we really believe in. And that's the second track. I think what creativity happens in my life is integration. I'm trying to combine things. So for instance, scholarship and writing and teaching, I've been able to teach a couple of classes. That's really life-giving for me, and write some books. So I was able to contribute to and co-edit this book on church planting called Sent to Flourish with InterVarsity Press in 2019. And then out of the fruit of my dissertation on study centers and the idea of integration of all of life came this book in 2020, Think Christianly. And so being able to integrate the different parts of me, I think helps spur creativity in our church and in my life, because as all these things interact and connect, God just seems to work powerfully in it. The other thing that kind of came unexpectedly to me was this emphasis on rural ministry. We were moving back to a rural space, and God opened up places to publish and write about it and be a voice for rural ministry, and at a time when it really few were. And it was really an honor and a privilege to be part of it, and then eventually became part of this project, a 5-year Lilly grant at Grove City College called the Project on Rural Ministry, where we're seeking to help rural pastors thrive from southwestern New York all the way down into Western Virginia. And that's been a real privilege to be a part of too. And those are things I could never have envisioned ahead of time. Even at PTS, I was getting prepared for it in ways, but I didn't even know it. But we have tried to follow where God has led. It's his mission, the Missio Dei, and we are trying to faithfully go where he sends us and to integrate all of life into that mission. And the result has been a lot of joy and a lot of excitement. It's been like an adventure, although sometimes we have been very tired, but God has sustained us. And I know he's done the same for you over this last year. All of us, honestly, should receive the Creativity Award this year, because we've all had to be creative. But this is just some of the ways God led us in a little town of Oil City, Pennsylvania. Thanks, PTS.